here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the musician and actor and artist Micko Westmoreland, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Has had lots of musical adventures in his life. Has a new album that is going to be coming out next year, but is releasing singles. And also starred in the film Velvet Goldmine in the late 90s, I do believe, which is one of my favourite films about a musical world. So this is the interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Micko, it's over to you.
Yeah, well, the first record they ever got was Monster Mash.
Classic.
By Bobby Pickett. And but that was sort of little kid stuff, I guess, because it would have that sort of monster-esque kind of appeal. But I wasn't allowed to use the record player because my parents thought that I would break it. But in actual fact, I knew how to use it better than they did. So when I came home straight from school, I'd play Elvis records and and kind of taught myself how to bop. And then as soon as the car came down the drive, I'd put the records away and make it look like it wasn't used. But my sort of first two bands that I fell in love with were Black Sabbath and The Who. And I think the thing about Pete Townsend and Tony Iommi as guitarists, both completely different and very distinctive, they really got me, you know, when I was about sort of 10 or something like that. And I think Pete Townsend is completely brilliant. He's a completely unique guitar player. And that idea of being like a lead rhythm player really appealed to me. So it wasn't all those embarrassing sort of gurney guitar solos. He wasn't really rocking the blues. Well, he was rocking the blues in the 60s, but it was very much his own take on it. And it was just so powerful.
Yes.
And as I say, with Tony Iommi, there's all the stories about him fingers getting clipped in a metal sawing factory or whatever it was in Birmingham, and then him getting into Django Reinhardt. But I think the thing that's very funny about that story is the fact that apparently he uses little metal caps on the end of his fingers when he plays live. But to make it more comfortable, he uses little circles of Italian leather underneath the caps. Now, apparently it's from the same leather jacket that he's been carrying around with him his entire career.
God, that's amazing. Yes, I've heard that kind of famous story a lot. And yes, I mean, but it was interesting you mentioned about sort of sneaking into the living room to play records, because we had a slightly similar set up that a record player appeared in that, I don't know, early 70s. So there wasn't that much music in the house. My parents had terrible taste in country and western, like Jim Reeves and Boxcar Willie. But my brother, who was 7 years older, got into prog rock. So I would sort of be fascinated with those records, but he had a Black Sabbath and a Deep Purple album alongside, you know, yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash and all those, which I was mesmerised by.
It's funny because my cousin was really into Monty Python and he had loads of the records and he'd tape them for us. And even though I was only about 6 or something at the time, like Matching Town Handkerchief, etc., and I didn't get any of the references. I did think they were incredibly funny. And then I was lucky later in life to be sort of taken under the wing of Neil Innes, who obviously is synonymous with the Pythons for doing the soundtrack to The Holy Grail.
Yes.
And more, and the Ruttles, of course. Bonzo's, Ruttles, The Holy Grail. I mean, the 70s was very, very much his when he came to the fore, I think, as a performer. But Neil was in a charity band that I run called The Spammed until he died unexpectedly about 5 years ago. And we actually did the last session, Neil's last session with him before he died, which was, I mean, it was a hell of a day. We did a cover of Mark Bolan's Get It On with Tony Visconti producing and mixing. and we did it at Rack Studios, which is legendary. So it was really phenomenal. But then, it was wishing Neil happy birthday a couple of weeks later, and then we found out that he'd gone and that he'd had a heart attack. So that was really quite tragic. But Neil was very kind to me. I'd send my songs to him, and he told me exactly what he thought, strengths and weaknesses, but in a very, very supportive way. And he once said to me, with words, think of something that immediately grabs people's attention. So it might be something really passionate. It might be sort of some lust instinct, or it might be something that presents a really startling and direct image in people's minds. And that really struck me, just get your audience early, basically. Don't make them wait.
Yes. Were you impressed though with Black Sabbath? Because I thought their lyrics to Paranoid and Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath were just so epic, but they were so deep, weren't they? As well. Finish with my woman.
Well, I don't. With Sabbath though, when they made their comeback album 13 about 12 years ago or something, could you imagine writing some of those Sabbath lyrics at age 65 or something?
No, this is not. Yeah, it's a difficult one for an artist, isn't it? To what do you sing about? Or topics of the day. When you see people like, you mentioned Phil Collins or Pete Murphy, who was in Bauhaus, and I've seen recently, I saw a clip of him on stage tripping and stumbling, and unfortunately he stumbled quite a long way before he fell over, and you're thinking, it's really, it's quite hard to keep that memory of, Bauhaus and Delia's car.
I saw Bauhaus on the first sort of reunion, which was about 2010 or something. And they split up on stage. It was really bizarre. Very, very bizarre. Maybe that's a story for another time. But Pete Murphy was doing his kind of decaying vampire bit, and Danny Ash ran off stage, and then he was kind of literally left high and dry. So it was odd to see the band implode in front of a full audience,
Yes, it would have been a bit embarrassing. Was everyone feeling a bit awkward, or did they start wanting their money back at this stage?
No, well, it was towards the end of the show. I think everybody was a bit in shock and quite bemused by it, really. But then ultimately, it makes it very memorable, doesn't it?
Well,
but
absolutely.
To sort of get back onto words, for me, in my music, the lyrics are very, very important, and I suppose it's that when you really hear a bad line in a song, it can really detract. It's a bit like a kind of weak performance in a film or something. So I always go through when I've written a song and check the sort of howler count, how many lines are acceptable and how many just are under the radar and they cannot be done. And I think for me, a big awakening was, as with a lot of people, was getting into Dylan, and it came quite late because I made electronic music for a long time, and I was very into the texture and the form of the sound, and the sound itself was almost ultimate for me. So I didn't really have to engage in lyrical content because it didn't really seem where my interests lied at the time. But then I started getting, Dylan is an ultimate example of what you can do with words. And when people say, words are not important in songs, I always say, they are to me, because it's a really vital form
Yes.
of the art that's there to be used. So it shouldn't be underused, in my view.
No, well, it's a weird comment really because the other band the other albums I absolutely loved at that very young age was the Carpenters. Really, I just love that kind of sentiment. No, not sentimental. It was kind of a tragedy, really, a romantic tragedy, and about alienation. And that's why I can see why Joy Division and the Smiths appealed to me so much, because I thought if you listen to the words that Karen was singing back then and how sad it was and tragic, and either rainy days or Mondays, or I should live or die. No one, I say goodbye to love. No one seems to care if I should live or die. It's a kind of pretty heavy thing to say, isn't it? And those lyrics are what I always kind of go straight to. Same with Paranoid from Black Sabbath, or Ace of Spades from Motorhead, or a Bowie one which was like we move like tigers on Vaseline. You think you sing it, but you have absolutely no idea why it works, but it does just come out.
But also, I mean, a lot of artists sort of maintain, oh, I have no idea where the words come from and all the rest of it. I don't always buy that, I think they kind of do. I think you do kind of have some sort of handle as to what's lying in the background. It may not be literal, and it's good that it isn't, because it's important to get lots of abstractions into writing. But at the same time, it's good to have a sense of expressing something, whatever that may be. So as I say, it's not literal, super narrative, although some songs work very well like that. That's not the qualifier, it can be anything ultimately. And I think when you tie yourself to a manifesto, you shut down your creative options. So it's always important to realize that it's that state of becoming, and that the music is journeying, and you don't actually know where the end destination is. And maybe the end destination is when you just stop making it, when you die.
Yes, it's kind of interesting. But do you think on that level about creativity as an artist like Morrissey in the sort of 80s, the lyrics were just so brilliant and you wanted to have them tattooed, you remember them, you sung them. And then sort of the latter work, they feel quite clunky and a bit like, oh, they're not special. There's almost
Right.
like, do you feel like it's about the person's essence or spirit that kind of can channel something quite magical? When you have that zeitgeist period of an artist, and then you think that's amazing, then their latter work, you think it's all there here, all there, but it's not. It hasn't got the magic. Do you ever ponder that reason?
Well, the thing is, when you become, or if you become very successful, then you have that time pressure, and everything's judged in relation to what you've previously done. So there's the obvious thing that, a big success comes from a lot of failures. And a lot of time building to that point, and then suddenly you're expected to do something better within a sort of 18-month, 2-year time frame, and that's tough. But I think ultimately there's lots of other bits that come in which take you away from the center of the music. And it's very easy to get unfocused by these things, which is why it's really good to, excuse a cuckoo.
What's that?
That's a cuckoo clock. That's my cuckoo clock in the background. It's very good to just kind of keep your eye on the center of what's interesting to you and not get too distracted. And ultimately, what should be the most interesting thing is the work.
Yes, absolutely.
What you produce, the creativity. And I always think that, I'm a believer in sort of being a maximalist rather than a minimalist, because I think that by closing your options down progressively, it's a step closer to inertia. Whereas, the universe is expanding, so let's join in that, and entertain lots of ideas and different ways of doing things. Because you've always got to remember that when you've got an abundance of things in front of you, you can just prune it back, and you've got loads of editing options. And maybe to come back to your original question, people lose the magic sometimes when they have the inability to edit anymore.
Yes.
There's plenty of artists you can think of where you just think, "Ooh, if that didn't exist, it would probably be a whole lot better."
Yes. I don't know. It's so fascinating. So did you grow up in Leeds?
I did, yes.
What was that decade? Was that the 70s or 80s? I have no idea.
A bit of both, really. Bit of both. I was born in '69, so I have memories of the '70s, the latter half of it, certainly. And then mid '80s, the second, Thatcherism and all that stuff, it was very, very tough. And it was, my brother's gay, and he was involved a lot in the Clause 28 stuff. And as his junior brother, I was pulled into some of that as well, just because I was going along with what Big Brother was doing. But I also agreed with, the cause. But there was a definite polarization in society around that time, as we talked about earlier, as to the tribalism of the 80s and the us and them nature of the politics, certainly.
But Leeds had a very famous, there was a book a couple of years ago, wasn't there, written about this art school that sort of had the Gang of Four and the Mekons and that particular scene. Did that filter into your brother's life more than you at that stage?
Well, the Mekons did, because when I was a young kid, I'd go to Shearer's music shop. And again, I was taken under the wing by an older musician who played with Brendan Croker, who went on to make his name in the Notting Hill Billies with Mark Knopfler. But Brendan used to play in the Grove for 35p on a Sunday night. And I was tiny. I would never get into a pub. And I had to say I was the bass player's brother in order to get in. And they'd give me a lift home in the back of the van with all the gear and stuff. And I absolutely loved it. And Brendan used to play a lot with the Mekons, so touched upon that. Wasn't really aware of Gang of Four, to be honest, whilst I was in Leeds. I was maybe a bit too young for that. But I mean, I'm a northerner at heart. There's something very refreshing about its straightforwardness. People don't like you; they'll tell you out straight.
What about the goths? Goth was almost born in Leeds, wasn't it, at this stage?
Yeah,
Did you used to see the goths on the streets and think, God, I want to be there?
I had a job as a cloakroom boy in the warehouse, which was a really cool club in Leeds. It was sort of the club. It was the Phonographique and the warehouse, but the Phonographique was much smaller. And Friday night was goth night, which also incorporated lots of other bits of music. So it'd go all the way back to sort of psychedelia. Certainly embraced all the glam scene as well. It's that sort of 1979 to 1981 scene,
Yes.
Which I think is really good for songwriting. And also you're getting the last fizzle of the big rockers that were still producing half decent music, like The Who and stuff like that,
Yes.
And the Stones as well, still produce. I mean, at the time we thought, they're over, but in actual fact, if you listen to that period, it's actually pretty good.
Yes.
The tail end.
Was it? Had they done Undercover by then with the?
Undercover was that 82 or 83 or something like that. I'm not sure, but you can shoot me down. I forgot my dates wrong, but I think it came slightly later. But certainly that period around the turn of the decade, I think is really interesting. And I'm dead lucky because I've just finished a new album called The Trinity for Micko and the Mellotronics. And Chris Kimsey, who was an in-house engineer at Olympic from 1967 onwards, produced and has sleeve credits on Sticky Fingers and Led Zeppelin 3, was synonymous with Stones production right up until the mid-90s. So he worked with the Stones for 25 years. And Chris has become quite a good friend. He's the nicest bloke, which is quite a rarity in the music industry. But he's an absolute diamond, is Chris. And we did a charity single originally with him for the Teenage Cancer Trust. And then I sort of vaguely stayed in touch. And then he said, what music are you working on at the moment? And I sent him some stuff across. And he started to get really involved in it. And it got to the point where, we're emailing all the time and lots of details, 4 or 5 emails a week. He'd give me a breakdown on what he thought about it sonically, ways that I could improve it, even as far as sending me voice messages with ideas for harmonies that he'd sing down the phone and things like that. So Chris was really there helping me to finish this album. That level of experience is phenomenal. He had some big hits in the 80s, Psychedelic Furs, a lot of Killing Jokes, more poppier era. So he did 80s and he did Love Like Blood and stuff like that.
Blimey, that's really quite handy. Were you aware of that sort of massive festival that's become popular now, hasn't it? Futurama, which was 83. Was that kind of on anyone's radar sort of Was that held in Leeds?
I remember the name, yeah, but again, I think I was a little bit too young for that to sort of experience it. They wouldn't let me in.
No, it was. I think there was a few. I think '83 was the one which had this massive, because they had some great promoters at that stage. I think there was John Keegan, wasn't there?
Yeah, Keenan, yeah, who did the Duchess of York for years.
Oh, the Duchess of York, yes, of
Which
course.
was brilliant. Really, really good. Dave Simpson, I know Dave, and works for the Guardian and stuff. He did the Fallen book, but also as well, he's taken an interest and written articles on the whole Duchess of York scene, because everyone went through from Nirvana.
Yes. It's that was, yes, I've seen a poster with like the lineup for just a typical month, and you just think, God, to have a chance to go back and sort of watch all those bands.
Yeah, 6 nights a week it was.
Yes. So when you got to sort of 85, you were probably 16, 17. Did you leave school at this stage?
No, I stayed on and spectacularly failed my A levels twice. I was doing all essay based subjects, and yeah, I mean, I've got a son now, and we're doing dyslexia tests and the like. But of course, back then it was just a mysterious word that you didn't really know what it meant, and it certainly wasn't spotted.
No,
So
absolutely.
and it's weird because it can really affect your confidence when you sort of tried to do something and failed quite spectacularly. And I was very lucky because I didn't really know what to do with myself. And then I was sort of spotted. I thought, I'll go on a photography night class, which is maybe what people think when, they want some artistic leaning, but want perhaps something that's more accessible. Well, that was my case anyway. And I went to a photography night class, and one of the tutors there said, "Oh, you should go to art school." And I said, "Oh, but my drawing's not that good." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "That's the first step through the door, and then you can do whatever you want when you're in there." He said, "I know loads of the tutors down at Jacob Kramer, Leeds College of Art now, and come down with me, and don't worry about paying fees. We'll get you in, we'll get you through the door," type thing. And then all of a sudden, I sort of really immersed myself in it, and did really well. Did really pretty well in that environment. And it's actually my art teacher, not the same guy, and someone that I met at Jacob Kramer, that's done all the artwork for the new album. So that's great.
God, that's a holistic love fest, isn't it? Just there, really. This is just amazing.
Well, also as well, Gary Barker is called. Gary, he got run over, and he did a series of these paintings as he was recovering, and they featured Siouxsie, and it was a lot to do with Siouxsie and the sort of demons of the adult world. And I guess Siouxsie becomes a symbol really for childhood and innocence to a degree, which of course we'll protect our kids from. And I really identified with these images in relation to what I was going through as well in my own life. And, my mum's got Alzheimer's, and that's very, very tough. And anybody who's experienced it knows that it's not just a description as a disease. All kinds of crazy stuff takes place because the personality is breaking down. The brain is highly confused.
Yes,
And the emotions go quite crazy. So it's extremely challenging. So it was kind of a hard time, and I felt that I could retreat further into the music and the creative work that I was doing as a result of it, because it felt like a safe place. So that's the sort of background, if you like. That's me doing my washing in public, but that's the story, if you like, that kind of that built the album.
Yeah, by God, that is something. So going back to that late 80s, early 90s that you would have been at art school, you got your grant, you got your tuition fees. I mean, Leeds had a lot of anarcho punks, didn't they, and squats at that stage. Did you did Chumbawamba, did you ever go to a party by Chumbawamba? This is the big
No, but
question.
I did go to a Chumbawamba gig, and I'll tell you something that's quite unusual. I remember the Young Ones was on telly at the time, right? And I went to the Chumbawamba show, and about 4 songs in, they all went mental and stopped playing, and started going on about the security or some sort of politics that was surrounding the event. About someone who'd been mistreated, and I thought they were joking at first. I thought they were like pulling a Young Ones kind of sketch,
Yes.
on stage. So that was quite a thing. I was like, it just really confused me.
Yeah,
So that
it's
was my
God.
Chumbawamba experience.
That was your Chumbawamba. Yeah, because that was kind of
That's
interesting.
not to downgrade their politics. It's just what
No,
I felt
no.
at the time.
Well,
It's
at that
just what
point
I
there
felt
was, because
experiencing it at the
you
time.
mentioned Clause 28, and then there was Red Wedge, there was Rock Against Racism, and then there was the Anti-Poll Tax League. So you would have been there, sort of plastering and say no to the poll tax, I guess. This must have been quite a hotbed of anarcho punks and anarchists.
It was Lead Six. It was the Lead Six scene. Yeah, indeed. But as I say, I was still slightly a bit young, just sort of not taking my O levels yet. So it was more kind of peripheral awareness rather than engagement within
Yes.
it.
So as you sort of, as we crept into the 90s, there was, because for me, the indie pop scene was like 83 to 87, which is the years of the Smiths. And then they finished, and then ecstasy comes along, then there's the dance scene, then there's grunge that starts to appear. How do you navigate into the 90s? Because at this stage, were you finishing college, university at this stage?
No. Well, I stumbled around for a long time. I went to Nottingham for a year and got kicked out. I had one of those exam nightmares where you sat trying to write an essay on something that you haven't got the foggiest about. So after about 5 lines of waffle, I just shrugged my shoulders and walked out. And that was a course in print management. I mean, I had no interest in it. My mum just made a few phone calls and managed to get me a place. But I went back to Leeds, and to be honest with you, it was a lot darker than when I'd left. And people were taking heavier drugs. And by the time you were either on the dole or you were in a bad job.
Right.
And I didn't want to take drugs, and I didn't want to get trapped. It seemed that a lot of people were getting trapped. So when I found art college, I was really, really relieved, because not only was it brilliant creatively, also there was a possible route. There's a possible route out,
Yes, I guess you do get to meet people. And also, I do remember sort of doing a course at that point where I didn't take it that seriously, which I slightly regret, because you just thought, thank God I've got 3 years. I don't have to think about what I'm particularly going to do. I've got a cushy little number here, and I can just going to get the grant. I can just potter around. And then
Well, I think it's really good for personal development. And, I mean, I was never in the halls of residence, but I can see the benefit of it, and there's nothing wrong with it. And it's the first step. When I guess children first go off on school trips, don't they? And that's the first step away from their parents. And then they maybe go interrailing when they get a bit older, and then they get a place at college, and all of these things is kind of moving away from parental influence bit by bit and developing independence in some kind of safe environment. Now, you could argue that that's very middle class, and maybe it is, but ultimately, I think universities and colleges, as a thing for anybody to experience, is incredibly valuable, because there's knowledge there.
yes.
All knowledge is power. And even though a lot of it can be spent with a hangover, It's still very, very worthy.
Oh,
I
God,
found that
yes.
when I'd been to college once and got chucked out, when I went back to go to art school, I didn't waste a moment. I was really into it, and I worked really hard and produced loads of work.
And what were you focusing on during that period of art school? Because you mentioned
Well,
photography.
no, film. I did everything, to be honest. But got more into video stuff, sound and video, and made some films, did some installations, that kind of thing. I went to Berlin actually for 3 months, which was really fantastic, and tracked down the innovators and pioneers of electronic music, Kraftwerk, and interviewed Florian Schneider in Austria and spent 2 hours with him drinking white wine down the Danube. So that was quite incredible.
Blimey. And how did you find Berlin? Was this the late 80s or early 90s?
No, very early 90s. The first Burger King was opened in the time that I spent there in East Berlin.
Right, my God, because I'd gone to Berlin around that. Oh, it was 87, and then again when the wall had come down. It was just
Okay.
it just had a very evocative vibe, didn't it? It was
Yeah.
just it felt like you were yes, it felt very exciting. There was the Christopher Isherwood, there was Cabaret, there was the idea that Bowie was there or had been there, and it just it evoked a certain mystery, and you'd
Yeah.
always heard about this Berlin, but then it was very different. And so were you there when the wall was still up? So you went to East?
No, I went, I think it was about 2 years after. I was there in 92.
Right.
I was
So
only within 2 or 3 years. But it's interesting. I mean, it was almost the other extreme because I found when I was down in Brighton originally, and I found it quite repressed. The art scene there, it was very critically orientated, and then I escaped to Berlin, and Berlin was like the other extreme. It was so avant-garde around that time. It was completely nuts. But it was really good to sort of experience that, certainly.
yes.
And I think as well, you mentioned before about, how music changed. And I was really quite into the dance scene and I made electronic music for a long time. I was a bedroom musician in the 90s, and that's how I got my first records out. And they were all instrumental. And I think for me, the thing that was really exciting about it was the technology was expanding so fast and becoming so accessible that the potential to do it at home was being served up to the kind of user or the creator for the first time. And I found that great. I really enjoyed that. And I put I worked under the name The Bowling Green, and I put quite a lot of very left field influences into the music. So I made it my business to track down the most unusual records I could possibly find. And I would tape really kooky films as well on my VHS player, and then I'd be pruning through all that material, putting it onto DAT tape, which was the medium at the time, and then lifting out like the weirdest samples and blending them in the most psychedelic way I possibly could, really. So it was a million miles away from the sort of decks and trainers attitude of that sort of conservatism that came with and very male as well. Big fish, little fish, cardboard box sort of dance scene.
Yes. Did you like people like Adrian Sherwood and the On You sound system? And
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I got signed to Trent Reznor's label at the end of the 90s with a number of warp artists. There was Plaid, which were the Black Dog, Luke Vibert, Square Pusher as well, or Tekra. I was the sort of junior partner of that scene, but managed to get on the coattails of that sort of that deal. So it was a bit like experimenting with electronica in America for an American audience. They did one album for the whole lot of us, and then we all got dropped.
right, was that Blue Planet Recordings?
Exactly, yeah. I went Blue Planet to Nothing Records. That was
Right.
it. But then it just didn't happen. in America. So no one was shifting any units, so we all got dropped.
I guess it was around the time of when people were illegally downloading music at that point, wasn't it? The late 90s.
Napster.
Napster was there. It kind of killed it at that stage.
But it's funny though about dance music, because I do believe that there's a real strand of counterculture in operation within dance music, and you can argue that just like the drugs got in a way to a certain degree, because it got apprehended by the law and by authority, and because it was a bit kind of banged and blown, it didn't really know what to do with itself, so it just got arrested. It was the counterculture music that got, that was too lobotomized by having a good time to go anywhere. I
suppose Castle Morton in the early 90s had slightly scared the John Major government, hadn't that particular festival blew people's mind, and then it just kind of increased a lot because there had been the Stonehenge and Glastonbury festivals in the 70s and 80s, and it was all Hawkwind and people like that, and then dance music started to appear with like the Orb and Adamski and a guy called Gerald, and people were just getting very excited. But then on the other side, you mentioned Brighton, but you had the Levelers and Crusties and lots of people with didgeridoos coming along as well, and people started to discover weekend festivals again with great enthusiasm.
Yeah, I mean, you can be a bit of a style fascist about this stuff because it's not necessarily, but it's not playing to that arena. And I think ultimately, anything any movement that's actually going somewhere at any particular time is always worth examining, because it's so hard to get that motivation, and it also is mirroring what people have an appetite for. Otherwise, it wouldn't be successful at that time.
Yes. So we slipped in from John Major to New Labour period with Team Tony. So what was it like for you then, sort of at that musical moment where you got dropped? How did you then navigate the millennium and into the next decade?
Well, I mean, I had quite a lot of success at the end of the 90s, sort of career-wise. I was involved at Goldmine, Todd Haynes' film, and obviously I got a deal with Interscope effectively. So, there was some money coming in creatively,
So how did you manage to score a major moment in a film, by the way?
Well, I met Todd Haynes, who's a friend of my brother, and he was over in London scouting for locations and possible people to be in the film. I just graduated from film school, and I met him down Old Compton Street in that famous cafe, and we just got on really well. We talked a lot about Kenneth Anger and a lot of avant-garde filmmakers, Jack Smith as well, and that's where the Jack came from, the name of my character, Jack Fairy. And originally I tried out for a smaller part, which was like the sort of Entourage's stylist. And then the casting director, Siouxsie Figgis, really liked me. And they said, maybe would you lip sync to all the young dudes on video and send it across to us with a view to playing a bigger role? Now, there were some sort of quiet conversations taking place, so I got wind about where it was going. So I did a couple of performances just with a friend coaching me on a Saturday night, sent it off, and then Monday morning they said, "Oh yeah, we want you to be in it." So I was very lucky to have that handed to me as a non-actor, because at the time Jarvis Cocker was mooted for it, and Jarvis is a friend of Todd's, and he'd have got the part if he'd have wanted to do it, but he decided that he didn't want to act. And then there was Brian Molko from Placebo as well, who was also very interested in the role, but at that point it had already been cast to me. So I was very lucky to receive that. And I really made sure that I was going to give it my best shot, As we mentioned earlier, a weak performance or a bad line in a song, don't know, can just detract. So I really did my homework, spent 3 months just not listening to anything other than glam rock, reading biographies, anything that I could get my hands on from that era. And of course, the internet wasn't around, so it was just like getting what you could where you could find it, and going to libraries, reading all the books and records I could from all my friends' libraries, and amalgamating as much glam information as I could.
So because when you were at film school, you were making films. You weren't acting, though, were you?
Oh no, I wasn't acting. But one side of the camera to the other often becomes a bit interchangeable, because I think the present generation are so used to being filmed now that it's maybe not so much of a big deal for them. I remember a time when people didn't want to leave voicemail messages on answer phones.
No, or it took you ages to leave the recorded message, because you thought, oh my God, do I sound like that? Do it again. Do I really sound like that?
Exactly. Yeah.
It was hours, and then you'd stumble, and then you'd just write it out and just do it once, and let's get it done. We've been here half an hour trying to put a recorded message to say, please leave your number.
Yeah, and there's a different kind of phobia now, because just anyone who rings anybody up, they're just like, what? Are you a freak? I'm like, no, I'm quite happy to pick up.
No,
but there is that phobia,
I would just imagine it would be a bit intimidating, thinking you're in the pub, you're thinking this is brilliant, I've lip synced to all the young dudes, this is going to be, and then you turn up sort of sober and you see what this kind of the cast and the director. I just wondered if you went, oh my God, what have I said?
Well, I just did loads of homework, as I said, and I relied on that as a fallback position. Of course, it's called method acting. I didn't know what method acting was at the time, but they shaved my eyebrows off. They gave me one yellow contact lens for a different coloured eye, and some of the things that I picked up were quite interesting from the biographies. Like Bowie, for example, never used to eat in public, so he'd never eat amongst others, and using the bathroom very discreetly. So all these very human bodily functions were suspended, which gives you an otherness. It's quite an alien kind of quality, that you're not doing these. You might be aloof or mysterious, or give you this sort of enigmatic quality, but say when they shave my eyebrows off, I'm quite fair anyway. I find that I'd go into the corner shop and people would look at me and they'd be slightly puzzled because they couldn't quite work it out. Things like a different coloured eye and no eyebrows. I mean, maybe nowadays we're all used to that stuff because everybody dyes their hair luminescent colours, but 25, 30 years ago, it gave you a certain mystery, and that's what the character had.
Because Robert De Niro on the old method acting would say he'd when he got the walk, he then felt like he got the character.
Okay.
So Mr. De Niro makes out. I think that's it. But did you have to sort of develop a posture, a walk, a style, and really play that character right down the line?
Sandy Powell did the costumes, and Sandy Powell's got Oscars for Doorsteps, and she made these really exotic, fantastic costumes, so I felt very empowered by the costume, and actors often say that if you get the look right, then the character sort of develops from there. So I really the industry best, and it was a very imaginative film.
Yes. Did you see those two David Essex films from the early 70s?
Yes.
That Will Be the Day in Stardust, because I always thought that captured the rise and fall a little bit.
Indeed, I think That'll Be the Day is definitely the stronger film, not perhaps the one that's dated quite so much. But no, I mean, I watched it about a year ago, and the soundtrack album is extraordinary. It's so good.
Yes, it's amazing. So how long were you filming for on Velvet?
Well, it was about a 3-month chunk or something like that. And what happens is you're contracted for whole weeks. which means you have to be available, but you won't necessarily shoot every day. And then they drop you in for individual days, and that's how it runs. So the whole block was about 3 months or something like that, just in terms of getting ready, in production, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, it's quite an anticlimax when it all finishes, because I wasn't an actor, and the film sort of flopped when it came out. It didn't make money, and it's only in hindsight that people have reflected back on it and thought that it's a good film, because basically its central theme was that of gender identity. Now, in '97, when we shot it, not many people knew what that was, whereas nowadays everyone talks about it all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's. And also, were people really into that glam period? Because I mean, I thought the film was amazing, and I remember getting buying the soundtrack, the CD, and thinking, God, because Shudder to Think was on it, and
Which was great. Which was really great. I mean, the songs that were commissioned to be written for the film were really authentic and really good songs. I mean, they could have just easily slotted in as, as you say, a charming B-side from that era.
yes,
Or even an A-side. There's some great stuff there.
yes.
I mean, it was Michael Stipe that was the soundtrack, the executive producer, and he sort of pulled everybody in that was associated with glam, really. So it was very much a hybrid of artists from back in the day, mixed with a lot of the sort of Britpop scene, I guess, as it was called at the time. So
it was all sort of fading, though, wasn't it? In a sort of haze of cocaine and champagne, wasn't it? By the late '90s, it was
yeah,
the party.
indeed.
The party was getting messy at that point. And did you have a nice premiere? Was there a occasion?
Yeah, I went to Cannes, which was quite an experience, as you can imagine. And it was funny because we got a car to the 7 o'clock screening of the festival, and I don't know, it must have been naivety, but the music supervisor who was sat next to said to me, he said, Micko, your life will be divided into 2 halves, before and after I open this door. And he opened the door, and it was just the classic red carpet and just a kind of volley of bulbs. And it's quite disorientating. It's kind of like being shot. It's weird. Because literally you're being photographed so intensively that it's like snowing flashes of light or something. So it is quite an overwhelming experience first time. And the thing is, it happened once. So I have that experience, but I didn't go on to be a film star, and I'm quite happy with that. I mean, I still get regenerations of it. It never quite fades. It's a bit like playing the Doctor or something, because every few years it comes round again. So we had a Tribeca 25-year reunion a couple of years ago, and I went over to New York for that. And that was the same thing, the festival's very pro, and lots of film stars, and you were treated as one. So I got a reprise on that. And then talking about Sandy as well, she had a screening in town in London, because her favourite film that she's done costumes for is Velvet Goldmine, and she was doing a Q&A, and I sent her a message on Instagram. She was like, no, come down, it'd be great to see you. So saw Sandy again and hung out. So that was good fun. So as I say, it never quite fades,
No.
You get a few years off, but it always comes back.
It comes, yes. Well, I think around that time, I think Austin Powers came out as well, and there was
He wasn't in it.
No, he was definitely not in it. But the film came out, and there was a sort of that celebration of swinging London, wasn't there? And you had the glam, then you had swinging London, and again a great soundtrack and a sort of, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I think he's ripe for a comeback. Actually, is His Austin Powers, definitely.
Possibly. But then, so then you recover from that experience. How do you navigate the next millennium then, the 2000s? What's your kind of direction from there?
Well, there was a big hangover actually from all that stuff, because in the music industry, certainly around that period, it's a bit like betting on horses. And if things sort of go wrong, then people aren't really interested in the explanation as to why, even though often it's not your fault at all. So, sort of the film didn't do well, and I was dropped from Interscope, and I started to get less and less interested in making electronic music, basically. I don't know, it was maybe a midlife crisis at that point, but just a few years early. And I remember Time Out of Mind by Dylan and Sea Change as well by Beck were very influential records around that time. And I started playing a lot more guitar again, because, of course, no one was really playing the guitar that much in the 90s. You know, everybody was on synths.
Yes. And
To quote,
I was going to say
sorry.
that there was also that, I don't know if you saw it, but the Woodstock 99 film, where obviously it all built up that decade with this kind of metal rock. You know, there was the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Marilyn Manson,
Uh-huh.
Korn, and then there was that 3 day of rioting at Woodstock 99, and I think everybody went. I think we'll have to draw a line under that, because we've gone too far, and all those bands were sort of dying of drug
It was like a
overdoses.
mini Altamont or something when everyone escapes in a helicopter at the end of it.
Well, actually, if you ever get a chance, see the film, because it will blow your mind, because it starts badly and then they go, and now it's going to get worse. And you think, well, it can't get any worse. But literally, people were running to sort of to try and get themselves, into rooms and lock it, because the crowd were just going mental. It is quite fascinating, but it's kind of exhausting by the end, because you're just thinking, it's like, Jesus, it's got worse. It's going to get worse. And and every band that comes on is kind of encouraging this mental crowd to go even wilder. And you just think,
right.
don't do that. And they go, yeah, we're going to set fire to it all now. And it's like, oh my God, you can't. And if you look at the lineup, there's only like 2 women for the whole weekend. It's just these, blokes who are just rocking it. So that
It's the
kind of.
mob, isn't it, turning cannibal?
It was. Everyone went very feral at that stage. So then, the next decade is going to be different, because obviously those bands were breaking up, getting their drug overdoses and all that. So the music industry is kind of probably a bit confused.
Well, I went and worked with my brother on quite a few projects. My brother's a filmmaker, and we did a couple of documentaries that I did the sound for, and then there are a couple of feature films as well. There's one called The Fluffer, which had Debbie Harry in, which was about working in the gay porn industry. And then there was one that won Best Drama called Quinceañera, which is like a coming of age party for a Mexican girl. And that, as I say, won Best Drama at Sundance. So that was a good thing to be involved in musically, certainly for a while. I also trained as a music teacher for a bit, which I didn't really enjoy so much, at colleges, etc., teaching music tech and things like that. But my heart was really into re-establishing myself, if you like, as an artist again. So, as I say, there was quite a hangover from the Velvet Goldmine, sort of Nothing Records time, but I just kept going and started singing again and coming back to guitar. And it's one of those things that if you don't quite know what direction to go in, providing you keep swimming ahead at a certain point, a destination, provides itself.
Yes.
And that was very much the case. So I made this big opus of a record called Wax and Wayne, which actually Terry Edwards put out on his label. And I spent too long on it, but in actual fact, it's probably the record that I have most sort of feeling for, because in it I can really hear myself struggling, but there's something quite I don't know, something quite very honest about it. In a sense, it's totally unpretentious, and it's also it was my solace at the time, and when that is something of great comfort to you, you find that you make quite an ornate embroidery of the affair, and I guess that's what the record is. It's like a struggling piece of embroidery.
So because it came out 2009, when did you start writing material for it?
Well, yeah, 2002. So
Right.
it took 7 years in gestation. But having said that, I did all the film projects as well at the same time, and they were a whole load of work. There was 4 of them. So quite a lot of other things going on in the meantime. But it was actually I learned to meditate. I learned to do transcendental meditation. And to be honest, when I learned how to meditate, I got the album finished really quickly.
Right, you got your mantra.
I did indeed, yeah. I heard David Lynch and Donovan talking about it on the Today programme one morning, and David Lynch had the whole team just completely cracking up. He was going to like Edward Stern, "You've got to do bliss, Ed. You've got to do bliss." And they were absolutely cracking up. And then Donovan did an instrumental version of Colours, and I just thought, this is too great. I'm going to have to look this one up. So I did, and it worked wonders for me. And I met my partner actually on a meditation retreat, and I meditate twice a day.
Since then?
Yeah.
Blimey, that's amazing. Was it a weekend workshop you went on to find your mantra?
Well, yeah, you learn TM in 4 sessions normally. So I found that out and went off and did the 4 sessions over a weekend, and then it went from there.
Yes, my God, it's good. It's all good stuff, isn't it?
It's very good for creativity, is TM. It really is.
Yeah, I know that.
Beatles came back and did the White Album, so there are lots of examples of it.
I think, Bowie went to Scotland, didn't he, to some Buddhist retreat for a while to become a Buddhist.
Yeah, when he was in his late teens or something.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of the guy who's the leader there. It escapes me, but he was smart because he turned to Bowie and said, Bowie said, "Oh, I want to learn. I want to be a Buddhist or whatever." And he looked at him and went, "Oh, I think you should go off and do your music."
Yes, I've heard that. That's a good one, isn't it? So he just came back, found Angie and Mick Ronson, and the rest is history, really, isn't it?
Yeah. We've got Woody Woodmansey at the moment in the charity band, which is fantastic. Basically, it's made up of, or originally, the sort of the genesis of the band was Rat Scabies on drums, Horace Panter at the specials on bass, Kevin Eldon at the actor singing, and Kevin's brilliant and such a great guy. And then me doing guitar and producing, and then Neil Innes joined. As I said before, we talked about Neil earlier, and that ran for a number of years. And then Neil unfortunately died, and Rat rejoined the Damned and had greater commitments, so he had to step aside. And Paul Cuddiford, who I've worked with quite a lot, who's a wonderful, wonderful musician and composer. He's in Boomtown Rats touring at the moment, and he plays guitar in Holy Holy as well as his own solo stuff. And Paul knew Woody Woodmansey, and we went out one night, and I said, "Oh, we got to find a new drummer for the charity band." And then I said, "What about Woody? Do you think he'd be up for it?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I can ask." And Woody was really great, very northern, very happy to sort of talk about the old times, just very casually. And we did the tribute to Neil Innes at the O2 Indigo last year. This was about a year ago, pretty much to the date, with Woody, which was great fun. And then we did a version of Devil Gates Drive. That was with Chris as well, the Stones producer, in, when was it, March time. That's just about to come out. And we did it. It worked out really well. Did Devil Gates Drive. It was great. It was really good.
Who was on vocals?
Oh, it's Hannah who Horace knew from the specials. So she
Right.
came and do it, and she really gave a very ballsy performance. And as I say, there was lots of energy in the room, and it's been captured in the track. It's really good.
Nice. Did you try and do that little dance and kick your legs up in sync?
Well, it's a bit too much of a difficult move, I'm afraid.
Yeah, groin strain. You've got to protect the knees and the groin strain. So then, well, after Wax and Wane, we get
Mhm.
into the next phase, the next decade. So there's quite a few years, and then you bring out yours, etc.
Yes, indeed. Well, I wanted to get a deal and establish something long term, and in actual fact, I realised that it was much, much better to do it myself. It's like that thing that when you're younger, perhaps you think that a record deal validates you, but in actual fact, a lot of the time, it can give you lots and lots of problems. So I got a distribution deal with Republic of Music, who have been wonderful down in Brighton, and I've stayed with them. And decided to set up my own label, which was Landline Records, and the first release that I put out was the Yours Etc. ABC album. Yeah,
Fantastic. My
but
God.
it's interesting actually because I did it all myself. There's a few performances on there. Mickey Gallagher plays on it out of Blockheads, and Mark Bedford plays bass on a couple as well. But essentially, it was me doing the work with a couple of guest performances for a day or so. And I remember the person who was doing PR at the time. She said to me, she said, "Where's the band?" I said, "Well, there isn't a band. It's kind of me." She said, "Well, it sounds like a band. You got to get a band together." And it sounds mad to say it, but I'd spent years and years in the sort of hermetic safety of the studio. And then I thought, yeah, I should have a step out there and see what's going on. And of course, it was like growing my hair long again for a headbangers reunion. I was just, this is a team sport where everybody wins. It's great fun. And the first gig we supported David Devant and his spirit wife, so that was fantastic.
Yeah, God, that's a brilliant lineup. Bleeding hell. So did you, from the previous album, how was your songwriting? Because it sounded like one was a lot of existential soul search, and this, obviously, you've done that, you've done the TM, well, you're doing it. So
Mm.
what was your processes like with this particular
Well, you
album?
start to gain confidence, don't you, in what you do, the more you do of it. And that's generally how it works. And I guess people evolve in different ways at different times. And for me, as I say, the Wax and Wayne was a big, big searching process. But then you realize that you've kind of got somewhere with it, and maybe the music becomes more optimistic, or it certainly did around that point. And also, I found sometimes you just, for a period, you know how to do something. You're like, oh, right, no, it goes like this now. And it's almost like you've been forming the jigsaw pieces in the back of your mind, and they fall into the frontal lobe, and you're able to access them and start building.
Right.
So that's how it went.
Fantastic. And did
Yeah.
you got your band together? You obviously supported a few bands. Did you
Mhm.
spend much time on the road at this stage, or were you just kind of playing the odd one-off gigs?
Well, I mean, probably playing about 10 times a year or something like that. So enough, to keep the band in good health. But there wasn't any extensive touring or anything like that. I mean, to be honest with you, the touring thing is maybe a bit of a fantasy because it's actually really, really hard work, and you get very, very tired. So, when it did come along, you kind of think to yourself, oh, actually, wish I was at home having a cup of tea and watching Columbo.
Yes.
And
Well,
also, I've got a family now, so I don't want to be away from them for too long. So, to be honest, I like the live experience, but I'm not hungry for a sort of 24-day tour.
no. Well, it's interesting because I did speak to a few people. I remember Niels Lofgren, who was in a solo artist and also with Bruce Springsteen, and
Yeah.
then now does solo. And he said he gets homesick after 20 days, and that's it. He's got to get back to his dogs and family, and
Mm.
he just can't cope with it, which is fair enough because you're not 20 anymore. So,
There's
and
that, but there's all, if you're a creative person, I mean, getting the feedback is wonderful. It's great when, you know, people start sort of chomping at the bit and foaming at the mouth and saying the music's great, because it's not a bit of adoration. All right, sure, I'm sure most people like it, but it's more the fact that you spend a lot of time creatively, actually by yourself, figuring things out, and it's how you kind of translate that experience into something in the real world that hopefully people will get something out of and enjoy. And when you see that people do, I'm just plugging my phone in, apologies.
No, it's
When you
okay.
see that people do and you get that energetic feedback firsthand, it's fantastic, you know. Because music's made up of lots of elements and lots of cultural influences and lots of snippets of things that people identify with. And when people come up to you and have clearly really got, they've really got it and they really like it, you know, you're like, oh yeah, all that time just kind of working it through was worth it, because, you know, it's a statement of fact and it's being affirmed.
Yeah, so I always found it quite magical thinking about certain albums you played and realise, especially when you realise it was from a different decade or much different decade, and probably everybody who made it has passed away. But then you wonder where they were when they wrote the song, what they were looking out the window, what city, what the countryside, and there where they recorded it, and what that process is like. I mean, it's quite interesting sometimes as a listener, imagining, you know, like what was Frank Sinatra? Where were those records written? You know, and those classics,
Sure.
and how did those lines develop, and how did they get that inspiration? So it's kind of I'm always curious as a listener of those kind of moments, thinking,
Yeah, some of
yes.
those early Neil Young records and stuff like that, you know, just where he was at when he was writing them.
Yes. So then after that release, do you then sort of form a new band at this point?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, I sort of went under Micko and the Mellotronics as a name, because I like the name, and also as well, I'd just done a re-release of a lot of the Bowling Green stuff and unarchived some of the electronic stuff. So Micko and the Mellotronics seemed to make sense as a name, and also I love the Mellotron as the first sampling keyboard. So
Yes.
that's how it formed itself, and it seemed like a good way for bringing other people in. And as I say, it you don't want you want to be a very benign dictator in a band, because it's it cramps other people's style if you're on them all the time. And also as well, you know, a lot of the time there's not a ton of money around in the music industry, so people are giving their enthusiasm because they like what you're doing. So equally, you've got to respect that in turn, you know. um so I don't know, as I
Yes.
say,
But the next band is kind of a super group in a lot of ways. This is the half dove, half pigeon, which
oh
is
yeah, with Jon Klein from the Banshees and stuff. Yeah, yeah, that worked really well for the first record and stuff, because I had a really young son at that stage. I mean, my son Gene was about a year and a half or something like that, and John came to Mick on the Mellotronics gig, and then I gave him a vinyl record, the Yours Etc. ABC, and I think he contacted me or I contacted him or something the next day, and he said, "Oh, where did you record this?" You know, so he was quite interested in it, and I just said, "Oh, just at home." And then I think we met up some time afterwards, and I said, "Oh, I've just finished this new song, Noisy Neighbours." I said, "Oh, if you wanted, you know, you could do a bit of guitar on it." And then, you know, we went from there really. And John stepped in, and we sort of co-produced the album. I did as much as I could at my end, and then he worked on it, and then we'd often meet up on Fridays and just kind of compare notes, if you like.
yes. What a delightful sort of partnership.
Mm.
And that must have been quite interesting because I did an interview with him earlier this year because he just had one of his early albums.
Oh, a Specimen album.
Yes, and done some live dates as well. So he's sort of coming out of the woodwork or the closet. Well, it's one of those things.
The goth closet.
The goth closet, yes.
The goth
Yes.
coffin.
He's
Good on him. He did a lot
Yeah.
of Batcave stuff as well, so that's been very sort of had a resurgence.
Oh God, the Batcave.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about the early 80s here?
Yeah, Jon was like one of the. I think him and the lead singer of Specimen that used to run the Batcave.
Oh God, I did an interview with the guy from Specimen. Yes, that was quite an amazing story, really. Yes,
Johnny
that was.
Scalott, was it? I think.
Yeah, God, that was quite something. I mean, we were talking about being tribal. I mean, the 80s was, you had the new Paisley, you had goth, you had psychobilly, indie pop, new romantics. It was kind of relentless, really, wasn't it? When you look back on it.
Yeah, lots of musical genres.
So once you got this album, this was just out at lockdown, wasn't it? Was this just the worst time ever to release a record?
Well, it's one of those things where you either blink or you just get on with it and do it anyway. And I'm a believer in try not to blink. And it was good that we did do it then, because when everyone went into production, there was a massive backlog at that time for doing vinyl. You had to wait 7 or 8 months to get vinyl pressed.
Yes.
It was good that we went when we did with it, really. But word gets out about a record. I think ultimately, people think, oh, if you get loads of press, then there'll be a buzz about the record, and there's an element of truth of that. Of course, there is, but it's people who decide.
This is true. Yes, I know.
I mean, you can think about lots of bands' careers in actual fact, where they'd maybe done an extra track or re-released a single and it taken off, and all of a sudden the album's sort of repackaged off the back of it, and then the other previous singles start recharting and stuff. I mean, that happened with Pulp, didn't it? Quite a few singles, I think, from Different Class were reissued after Common People. Or maybe not. But there are certain examples, certainly, where bands have managed to find their audience, if you like, and all of a sudden there's an appetite for what they do. I mean, the Stone Roses did the first album, didn't they, with that hairdresser manager guy, and was missing a couple of tracks, and then of course they redid it with John Leckie, and there you have it.
Yes. Well, actually, the other one of that is Dear Old, a band that I didn't particularly like, but I was watching a documentary because I just love music documentaries, and it was on Yacht Rock with Katie Pluckrick, and they had the guys from Toto who were really funny and engaging, and it was like they were talking about the album, and the last track on the second side was Africa, and they thought, God, we'll just stick it. Let's not pretend it exists. No one will ever find it, and that was the track that obviously catapults the band and the album to great success, and we'll know them forever, won't we?
Because wouldn't it be nice to get on with my neighbours? The band fought against that record being released. They did it as a joke, and they thought it was terrible. But of course, it's most famous record they ever made.
Yes.
So there's tons of records that come in that way.
But the hit single is kind of, unfortunately, the big thing, isn't it? It's the kind of advertising of a sort of a band if it catches. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm not so sure anymore though, because no one knows what the charts is, do they? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have the same sort of relevance to it, which is a shame. I think that they should still put a TV show on that manages to focus some chart in some way. I mean, they must be able to kind of suss some way to get some sort of hierarchy of sales and make it into a program. Because I think we do miss a central focus on how music is journeying, what people are into, because everything's so plural now. And there were so many focal points that you would go to, whether it be a record label like Mute or, I mean, Domino still has some leverage and kudos and all that. but it's still very, very plural. And everything's gone onto the net. And of course, it's harder to find things because it's like looking for diamonds in a kind of pyramid of hundreds and thousands. It's very time consuming, and you don't know how to get there. It's a
No.
complete lucky dip.
Well, we used to have
Lottery is.
we had the sort of gatekeepers in sort of back in those days because I went to the John Peel show and put my trusty TDK D90 cassette in, record it, and then listen to it quite a few times, and then you go, oh yeah, that's quite good, or that's quite an interesting track. I might sort of follow that, and the rest of it you just ignored. But kind of happy to have heard it, but thought I probably yes, I don't need to have too much more.
Well,
later.
you think about this. I mean, how influential John Peel was, but what was actually going on at the time, it was really quite a small audience. He used to do the Festive 50 each
Oh, we
year.
love that. The fest, it was so important to record the
But
festive.
some years he didn't even do Festive 50 because they didn't have enough nominations.
I know, but it was kind of weird because at the time I didn't know anybody else who listened to it, so it was a bit of a conversation of killing it because you go, oh my god, have you heard the Bundu Boys or Augustus Pablo or even the Smiths? I remember people go, oh, I hate him, can't bear the voice,
Mm,
or Public Enemy. I remember going, oh, that's an interesting thing, and
mm.
but that was a disaster at parties because people would want to talk about, Duran Duran or Spandau Ballet.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's the Brian Eno quote about the Velvet Underground. They only sold 2,000 records, but it spawned sort of 2,000 bands or something.
Yes, it had that. So yes, at the time it was very niche. But then there was, as you mentioned, the Duchess. Every city and town in the UK had an indie alternative night, and those bands would get their little trusty transit vans, and you could sort of create this kind of scene, a bit of a tour. And you do
Mm,
the Norwich Arts Centre, or you go to Brighton, Glasgow, Bristol, Manchester. I'm not going to go through every city, but everyone had that alternative night, probably on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday,
mm,
and 100 to 200 people would turn up because they'd sort of either had the NME, Sounds Melody Maker, or the John Peel show. So that was
mm.
enough to keep that scene going and for bands
Yeah,
to.
I think sometimes I find it a bit frustrating that sometimes we'll play gigs and there'll be some young people that will come down and they'll be really into it, and you think there's how do you expand upon that access point, because it seems that there's a metric for most things, and if your demographic is not chiming, then you can't get coverage. But in actual fact, you think, well, people really like it. So there's some sort of distorted algorithm which is not allowing music and creativity to maybe proliferate in the way that you would wish, because it just seems to feed things back to people of your own age group and your own likes. But what happens if you like loads of things? What happens if you're
Yes.
still open minded? I mean, there's a thing with age that, as a generalization, people tend to revert to what they know. And there's something inherently conservative within that, which I always find a bit of a disappointment, because ultimately, music has endless possibilities. I mean, people say that there's only so many notes, but you wouldn't say that to a classical music composer or a jazz pianist or something. There's always room for development, and and music's sort of so plastic, really, or it has this plasticity about it that you're able to mold it and change it. So it's a very sort of chameleon-like medium, I
Yes.
find. And of course, that chameleon has many potentialities.
So many. Yes. What creates that magical sequence? I mean,
Mm,
when you hear, like T Rex, or because they're very basic songs, but there's something that comes together which is quite a magical moment. Or even, and you
mm,
mentioned Neil Young. I mean, some of those early kind of acoustic songs are still so beautiful because the lyric is
yeah.
amazing. The guitar playing somehow resonates, but it's not
Something
technical.
quite homely about them as well, There's something quite homely about Harvest. there's a comfort there. I find in the listening experience, you know.
Yes, well, absolutely. There is, I mean, and I always find that music is quite seasonal. So when it comes to autumn, I find I put on John Martin's Solid Air or Nick Drake
Uh-huh.
or Joni Mitchell's Blue, and it's like, oh
Sure.
yes, and some Van Morrison as
And
well. But
it's just, I think there is real sexism in relation to Joni Mitchell's work. I mean, she did a staggering volume of work. She's so incredibly talented. And of course, she gets talked about, but, she doesn't get the same coverage as the male guns, does she?
no, well, you just have to look at the covers of the Mojo magazine to realise that it's just men. This month it's going to be John Lennon, but there's either Dylan, the Beatles.
Uh-huh.
It's the usual people. And then every 10th edition or 11th, there's either somebody like Kate Bush or, oh God, who else? Probably just Kate Bush. And then and then it's back to Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and
Sure, sure.
it's
Well, they got
the
to sell copies ultimately, but I hear what you're saying, and it comes back to that demographic, doesn't it? Of just like, oh, this is the metric that will guarantee bums on seats. I mean, they did that originally with Star Wars. They're just like, not many people like science fiction or didn't around that time, and they're like, yeah, but we know we've got like 4 million super fans that will go and see it. So we can calculate a budget from people that we know will definitely go and see every science fiction film. And, they got the merchandising and the world right, and Star Wars took off as it did.
yes,
But
absolutely.
science fiction films were not being massively made around that time, not to the same degree as they are nowadays.
No, well, it's quite prolific, isn't it? Everything's sort of you blink and you
Mm.
kind of miss it. But there
But
is
I remember in the 80s, right, that I mean, this is pre the first Batman film, that I really wanted to get a Batman T-shirt, and I just couldn't get one anywhere. Bizarre. And I had a friend that worked in a fancy dress theatrical costumers, and she nicked me this Batman patch from a costume that I then sewed onto a T-shirt. And the same was with Dr. Martin boots of different colours. I remember getting aerosol cans and spraying Dr. Martin's different colours because you couldn't get them in anything other than black and the oxblood red.
yes, I know. Did you go for silver?
I did indeed. Yeah, how did you know?
God, it's like Darren Brown, isn't it? Sorry about that. I think everyone went for a bit of a silver vibe, weren't they? It seemed to be a status, a statement of some
Mm,
description.
mm. But
Uh,
the thing that we were talking about a couple of moments ago is just this thing about being able to sort of beat the algorithm in terms of there's the audience out there, and younger people are often more open-minded in terms of new musical experience. And I've certainly found anywhere when young people have been down to our gigs, they've been really into it.
yeah, and I remember when I was growing up, I loved going back to that 60s and getting the main bands and the obscure bands, discovering some. So I could imagine for a younger generation, the 80s, they probably say, oh, that must have been amazing. I mean, it was politically horrendous, but actually musically, great soundtrack.
Oh
And
yeah,
then,
no, indeed.
and you just think, God, yes, of course. Because they wouldn't have any prejudice, unlike me, who was like, no, you can't like that and you can't like that because, that's synthetic or that's, electronic.
Mm.
Like Depeche Mode or Soft Cell at the time, I poo-pooed it. But then you look and think, oh, I wished I hadn't. What a mistake that was. But that was
It's
life.
funny though, because if something is individual enough, then people get it. Like you think about the model getting to like number one, and I think 1981 or something. Kraftwerk. It was released later. I remember that than when it came off the album, and but it just sounded so different. Everybody went with it. They were just
But
like, "Oh right, this
but
what's
but
this? It's great."
but you had Oh Superman before that, which was even more bizarre because that was
That's true.
even more unusual. I mean,
The
these.
Jam were a bit like that as well, in that the Jam were embraced by sort of young people, everybody. It really did pull across different genres. Um, because they were shit hot at the time, and they were a very explosive band.
Yes, even
And people kind of got it.
I know, even David Cameron liked them.
Oh gosh, I just don't understand how Paul Weller's called the Mod Father though, because Ray Davies is the originator, and then Pete Townsend, I guess, ultimately. But Paul Weller's called the Mod Father, and it's sort of, it's over a decade later than it was the first revisionism, wasn't it? Really?
Yes, I mean it was. He was. There was bands like there was a band called The Action. I remember getting into them and thinking, God, they're just amazing. I guess they're a mod band, but then there was, I don't know. I mean, how Paul got that. Anyway, he went into the Style Council. So then, just then, bring it up to date. Then you brought another album out, but you've got a new one coming out this autumn, winter, haven't you?
Well, no, it's not coming out until next year. It's all done, but basically we're just building it up single by single. Basically, I mean the album will be out next year. As to exactly when, I'm not sure. Probably in the springtime.
Right. So the album before that, what was
La Vie Anglaise, yeah.
Yes. Who was the lineup? Who did you have in the band at this stage?
Well, there was the original drummer, Heidi Heels joined for a while as well, and we were a three-piece for a short time. And then Nick, the drummer, and Heidi left to go to Bristol, and I could kind of see that it was pulling in different directions. So La Vie Anglaise was mainly made by myself, and I'm quite good friends with Horace out of the Specials, and I remember I phoned him up and said, "Oh, Horace, do you know any good bass players? I've got to find a new bass player." And he said, "Well, I'm a bass player. Well, I do." And I was like, "Certainly." I said, you can't join the band." And he said, "Well, I'll come and play bass. Just tell me what you need." And he came to play around the time that Terry Hall was very ill. And I remember him telling me at the time that they'd had to cancel a load of recording because Terry wasn't well enough. And I didn't ask any questions more than that. But that's when Horace made his contribution to the record, and I think he played on, 6 or 7 other tracks. And then I met Budge McGraw of the Caesareans just on social media. And it turned out we knew loads of the same people, good friends with Terry. Budge has got a load of experience. He's a tremendous guy. He's the sort of big daddy bear of the band. He's the protector. And he came and finished the rest of the bass on the album. And, and we're recording with Budge next month. So, we're doing some bonus tracks with Chris, which is going to be exciting, Chris Kimsey.
Yes.
But so Budge was on board, and then it took us a bit of a while to get a drummer. We had a bit like Spinal Tap. We got a couple of exploding drummers, and we couldn't find the right people. I tried to get Dave Barb at Bow Wow Wow to come and do it, and he ummed and ahed a bit, and that didn't quite happen. And then Budge said, "Oh well, there's Jan Noble. He's a poet, and he was really good, but I don't know if he's playing anymore." So like a detective, we brought him on to the last case. Well, like, Jan, come and do this last job. So Jan came out of hibernation and really, really loved playing again, and he's back on the horse and he's loving it.
Blimey! So he was also in the
Caesareans, yeah. The rhythm section is the Caesareans. Paul Cuddiford mentioned earlier Boomtown Rats and Holy Holy. Paul plays on all the album, but he's had really big musical commitments this year. So he sort of moonlights with us when he's around,
Yes.
But we're playing with him again, and we're going to do this session with him in about a month or so, 6 weeks. So, Paul's around for that. So we're sort of 3-piece come 4-piece, when the synchronization's right.
My God, that's very handy, isn't it? So then the album's all done. Where did you record this?
Well, it's all recorded at home. You can do it all at home now. Yeah. Paul did his bits in his studio and then just sent them across to me, and they were all brilliant. And didn't really need it. He really gets a sense of what a song's about, and you know, when you work with lots of musicians, they may give you good music, but if they actually listen to what's the content of the track and respond accordingly, I mean, space, people talk about it, but when you really feel it, it really can make a musical line magnificent,
And so did Chris Kimsby, was he the executive producer of it?
He's exec producer, yeah. I mean, they say exec producer, which means they might just go, yay, and get the money in, like George Clooney or something. But Chris certainly wasn't that. Chris was very involved. So much so, as I say, we're going to go and do some recording with him at the end of next month. Because it just seemed like a good way to tie a bow on it. I said, "Oh, Chris, would he come down and do some time with us in the studio?" And he said, "Sure." Because there'd been so much communication that had been done electronically that it just made sense to get the band in the room because,
Yes.
everything's largely done independently now. You're sort of drafting in performances and gluing it all together as a sort of grand collage, but it's something very different to actually just have people playing together in the room and responding to each other and capturing that. And so, yeah, looking forward to that.
So your new single, Misery Guts, is
Yes.
out. So what was the idea behind that? Where did the inspiration come from?
Well, I remember I read Who on Earth by Tom Baker, his autobiography, years ago. And he mentioned this line about people perfecting exquisite torture over one another over time. And that really stuck with me as a line, as a sort of image. And then I think I was reading the twits to my little boy, and that reawakened that idea of just being mean and perfecting this like meanness over time. And one of the things that I sort of reference a lot in some of my writing is pettiness, how people get so particular about why they think a thing and a whole set of justifications that surround it. And at a certain point, you just got to get over yourself
Yes, well, absolutely.
and realize that, well, yeah, but that's a small potato, and to be able to see these things as small potatoes, and yeah.
I think
So it's a
petty.
comment on that.
I expect pettiness comes from when you sort of just live in a very closed environment, so you can act in a certain way and not feel embarrassed, and then you
Well,
just
it comes from being very judgmental as well,
yes.
and what you find is that people who are overly judgmental are invariably wrong.
Mm, yeah.
Because the thing is that you can have a bit of an intuitive hunch about someone or a situation, but you've also got to give people the benefit of the doubt because things can just roll in unexpected ways. And it's very compassionate and forgiving to give people the benefit of the doubt that it didn't really fall right on that particular occasion. And you don't have to condemn them for the behavior accordingly. It could have happened on a different day, or it could happen again in another environment when everything's completely fine.
Yes.
And I think sort of suspending, um, as I say, suspending a condemning judgment is really important. It's important to me anyway,
Yes.
because as I say, there's nothing better than being proved wrong, because that's when you learn something.
I think I remember going to see, was it John Waters who was the film director?
Uh-huh.
I think it was Crybaby, and he did a Q&A before the film, and he just said, "Oh, don't judge anybody until you know their story, understand a bit more about them rather than just judging them for just what you see, and then you'll realize what their behavior might be, why their behavior is in such a way." And it's kind of, I did sort of remember this back in God knows decades ago, thinking, oh, actually that's quite true, because when you hear what someone might have gone through in life, you think, yeah, okay, yeah, I can't, I need to give people a bit more slack but when you're young, trying to justify it here, aren't I? But it's easy to go, oh God, why are they drinking and taking so many drugs? That's hopeless. And then it's like, oh, then you hear why and a part of their story. And I know people can overdo their narrative and stuff, but then at the same time, it just allows one to be
Well,
less
also,
judgmental.
when you're younger, you can't work out why, like, your grannies like look so wrinkly. You just kind of think, what happened to you? Well, life happened to them,
Yes.
And to make judgments about people on a superficial level that you see walking down the street, it's just like, the young teenager that sees the old man and thinks, what have they got to do with me? They don't exist in the same universe. Well, of course they do, because they've just changed physically, and often people can be quite similar. Their core personality can be the same throughout a lot of their life. And you think, well, you may think they look like an old man now, but they sort of took acid and watched Jimi Hendrix and all manner of other stuff.
Well, yes, absolutely. I know.
As I say, appearances can be very deceptive.
We are both thinking about Neil Young's Old Man, aren't we? That line.
Mm,
Vaguely. No, you're not. I was.
yeah, no.
So the single before that, Would You Believe It? What was the inspiration for this one?
Well, I moved quite close. I can see old Holloway Prison out my back window where I'm sat here talking to you. It's been knocked down now. And when I moved back to the Holloway area, I lived here in the early 90s, and time is very, very odd. Timey-wimey, as Stephen Moffat calls it in Doctor
Yes.
Who, in that when I lived down Holloway in the early 90s, it was the same time period from which Joe Meek was making music to now. So if you like, it's in the middle. So it's a concert, I can envisage that time period because I remember living there in the 90s. And then you think, well, if you can envisage that and rewind back the same period of time, that's when Joe Meek was doing all his stuff down 304 Holloway Road. So I got really into Joe Meek and wrote the song which came off the last album all about him, called Holloway Road. And then the Ruth Ellis one had on my mind to work on for some time, but I had to find the right way in. And to be honest, I think a lot of stuff that happened with my mum really got me shaped a lot of that song. So in the way, even though I'm singing about Ruth Ellis, I'm singing about it in partly about my mum.
Yes.
And that helped me form some of the other elements of the song.
Blimey. Yes, it's kind of interesting.
And it became a big TV thing, which came out last year. And, we approached the producers and said, look, I've written this song. Do you like it? And they said, oh, it's very nice, but we have our people.
Yes.
So the Joe Meek song and the Ruth Ellis song are literally because it's in my hood. It's the stuff that goes on around here.
Yes, and the album's called The Trinity, coming out early next year, and then so is that sort of February, March time?
Well, as I say, we're building it in a series of singles, so it's always good to increase awareness about what you're doing, and invariably you do that single by single. So there's quite a slow build. I mean, there's a tendency with an album that if there hasn't been coverage of it or a bit of a buzz about it, that the album comes out and then everybody just looks for the next album that's on the build.
Right.
So it's just a thing about doing it a little bit at a time and having a new single every couple of months, and then the album will drop. There's a timeline all worked out, basically.
Beautifully, your Excel spreadsheet. Well done. It's all there. And you got live dates, haven't you? You've got Camden in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, indeed. There's a couple as well scheduled for next year. But we played a couple of times earlier in the month, actually. We played Dublin Castle, and we played Hope and Anchor as well. And we played a really good gig with Cult Figures, Vintage Paper Dress in Hackney. That was at the end of July. That was great. It was a full house, and it was a really good night. We've got this Fiddler's Elbow gig coming up in a couple of weeks' time on the 25th of October.
And is it right? Are you also a member of the Woodentops as well?
Yes, that's all going on. So we went to Paris last week actually to play with the Woodentops. So that was great fun.
They're fast and furious, aren't they? Those songs.
They certainly are.
Are you sort of managing to sort of keep it together?
Well, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what goes on in terms of longevity of the Woodentops, because obviously I've got a lot of my own band commitments. But they're very good people and they're good friends.
Oh my God, they're lovely. I mean, Rolo is, and well, I remember buying the single, Well, 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 and thinking, this is just extraordinary. They are just an amazing band. I'm so pleased that they're sort of back out there doing it.
Yeah, indeed.
Are they being discovered by new people?
Well, everyone's acting independently, or most people are. So, they've got sort of legacy, if you like. Lots of people are aware of them. They're well liked. And they're an original band. So, they've got what they need in order to serve them, basically.
Yes. God, well, that's yes. Well, good luck on that. So, do you have any studio recordings with them, or are you just playing live?
No, not just live at the moment. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, good. Well, that's brilliant. Look, this is brilliant. But it's nearly bedtime.
Sure.
But thank you ever so much for your time. And if you want, I can always send you a link to this fascinating interview. And yes, and look forward to hearing the rest of the album. I've listened to your single Misery Cuts because there was a link on your press release, so that was all good. And yes, it's been nice discovering your earlier work.
Well, thank you for looking into it. Now, as I say, with Mystery Guts as well, it's also got quite a sort of Scott Walker, Jack Brel kind of inflection to it, which is also sort of peppered across the album, really, because I quite like the sort of high camp and the melodrama of that 60s material. And I find it quite funny as well. I mean, not all of it's funny. Some of it's very, very dark. Some of it's very dark. But as I say,
yes.
there's nothing wrong with speeding stallions heading over the horizon, and the high drama of that exhilarating experience. It's very visual music. That's what I mean. That's what I say. Stallions jumping over the horizon. It's just it really conjures all these very powerful images. I think not only lyrically but musically.
Yes.
So when you're enjoying yourself, you can do that kind of thing. So on this album, I really found a place to kind of enjoy myself, and that's hopefully people can hear that in the material.
Yes. Well, we grew up, I think you were a bit younger than me, but things like Seasons in the Sun, which was a Jacques Brel song, was always quite emotive, wasn't it, really?
Indeed. Indeed.
And then there was Harry Nilsson's I Can't Live If Living is Without You. And even Two Little Boys is quite a tragic song. I mean, it's that's not Jacques Brel, by the way, but
Yeah.
it was, but it was just that there was a story that as a young listener, you would listen to this and feel quite depressed by the end of it because there was something tragically sad, and you felt like even at the age of 10, somebody must have died in this song. And but then it climbed, as you mentioned, back to charts. Songs would go in at number 34. Next week it'd be like number 27. My God, this is so 23. Oh my God. You'd see this arc, whether it was the winter or the summertime, of that sort of story of a single going slowly up the charts to the top 10, and then now it's going out, and then you have to wave it off. But anyway,
it's funny though. There's a bit of, I mean, when I say about enjoying yourself on the record, I also spoke earlier about it being a very difficult time and retreating into the material. So you can say, well, how do those two things add up? Well, I think, to be honest, sometimes there's a sort of luminosity that comes from darker periods in your life, because, as I say, there are certain occasions where you just think, I have to get over myself and I have to get through this. And as I say, there's a sort of luminous that comes out of the darkness, really, from throwing yourself into being creative, and disappearing up your own fundament and coming out with a bunch of croissants. It's just like, I've got the goods now because I've been through the dark journey of the night.
God, blimey, yes. Well, this is going to be fascinating to hear the rest of the album.
Well, I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I definitely will. But look, thank you ever so much.
No worries. Thank you, David, for having me as a guest.
Yes. Well, look, have a lovely evening or night, and take care.
Okay, and you. Very nice to speak to you. Bye-bye now.
Bye. And as you can gather, dear listener, that is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Micko Westmoreland for giving me the time. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 show. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.